abnormality is an important cause and easily treatable cause of abnormal uterine bleeding. So just a few baseline investigations. Rest the investigation can be ordered according to the history that the patient gives. The next thing that we need to do for evaluation is endometrial sampling, and this is a very important test in this age group. Apart from that, we would also take the help of ultrasound and, if required, saline infusion sonography. Now, what is the role of endometrial tissue sampling? Sampling is indicated in all women after the age of 45 if they are having abnormal uterine bleeding as a first line test. This you must remember, that we have to take a tissue sample from the endometrium if the woman is more than 45 and you have decided that yes, her bleeding is abnormal. But having said that, and why we have chosen 45 years is because the chance of malignancy increases as the age increases, and usually it is not very common less than 45 years of age. But despite that, if a woman has a high risk of endometrial cancer, we all know what are the high risks of endometrial cancer. If she has unopposed estrogen exposure, she's obese, she's diabetic, she's nulliparous, she has been having anovulatory cycles because of polycystic ovary. These are the things which make us high risk for endometrial cancer. In those women, endometrial sampling is indicated even if she is less than 45 years of age. Apart from that, if there is a woman who's having persistent abnormal uterine bleeding and she's not responding to medical treatment, tissue sampling is recommended. Now, once we decide, yes, these are the indications for tissue sampling, how do we take that sample? We can either do an office sampling procedure, which we call office endometrial biopsy, or we can do a dilatation and curettage, or we can add on a hysteroscopy. Now, let's see how we choose between the procedures once we know that there is an indication to sample the endometrium. Endometrial sampling, the office-based procedure, the EB, is the procedure of choice. This is because it has a very high sensitivity of picking up a malignancy, low complication rate, not very expensive, and it can be performed without significant pain. And this is an important procedure because as postgraduates, all of you must be doing endometrial biopsies in the OPD. And this is one procedure which is done by the postgraduates. So this is something you must understand, that these are the indications and this is how you have to do. And because of the advantages, it has almost replaced the need for a diagnostic DNC now as the first line. For the sampling procedure, the recommended is a Pippel suction curette. You can use a Vabra aspirator, but if you don't have any of these, a thin carbon cannula number 3 can be easily used, or an endometrial brush can be used. Now, these instruments have been recommended because we want a very thin diameter cannula to enter the uterine cavity, because we are not giving anesthesia. We want the woman to be comfortable, and so these thin cannula usually do not cause too much discomfort to the patient, and we can do it in the OPD. I have just put down a few specially points how to make your patient comfortable, because it is the postgraduates who are doing this procedure. So we can make this procedure comfortable for the patient if we reassure the woman, we explain what exactly we are going to do. She's mentally prepared, she will tolerate the procedure better. And it is better to give an NSAID about half an hour to 1 hour before the procedure. And sometimes, if it is possible, we can even do the procedure without putting a tenaculum, which leads to a little bit of pain. And if required, we should do a very gentle dilatation of the cervical canal. We can even instill xylocaine in the intrauterine cavity, and this will make the procedure comfortable for the patient. So as postgraduates, please try that the patient you are doing an endometrial biopsy on is comfortable, and it will give you a lot of happiness to do a good endometrial biopsy. You don't need to give any prophylactic antibiotics, and usually, if done properly, a sample can be obtained in almost 90% of the patients. But what you have to remember is that endometrial biopsy is informative if the pathology is global. Global means the entire uterine cavity, endometrial cavity is affected, then endometrial biopsy gives a very good information. But if it is a focal pathology, then EB may not be very sensitive. Suppose there is a small polyp or a submucous fibroid, endometrial biopsy is not a very good modality to pick up abnormality in these cases. So Endometrial biopsy is the first line, especially patients when we know it is a global pathology. Second evaluation technique that we have is an ultrasound. Now, how does ultrasound, especially the TVS, how does ultrasound help us? The ultrasound helps us to rule out structural lesions. So if you do an ultrasound, you find a fibroid which you were not able to detect on bimanual examination, you know that fibroid is the cause. Or adenomyosis, if you are able to see adenomyosis on ultrasound, we know that that is the cause. The other advantage is that we can even evaluate the adnexa concurrently. And especially if a woman cannot tolerate the office biopsy, ultrasound gives a lot of information before we take her up for any other procedure. Now, if the ultrasound is available and it is not very expensive, this can be used as the first line modality in a patient who comes with abnormal bleeding, and then we decide about endometrial biopsy. But in case you are working in a setup where an ultrasound is not easily available or it's expensive for the patient, then we can straight away go for an endometrial biopsy if we have decided that this is an abnormal bleeding and the patient has an indication for endometrial sampling. Now, what is the role of the TVS endometrial thickness that we talk of? It is different, the significance is different in postmenopausal and it is different for premenopausal women. Now, in postmenopausal women, if the TVS shows that the endometrial thickness is more than 4 to 5 millimeters, then we need to sample. An endometrial biopsy is required. Now, where has this 4 to 5 millimeter cutoff come? It has been seen that if the endometrial thickness is less than 3 millimeters, the chance of endometrial carcinoma is very low. And this chance of having a carcinoma as the cause of AUB increases as the endometrial thickness increases. So if you use 4 millimeter as the cutoff, you will pick up more cases, maybe 96% cases. If you use 5 millimeter as your cutoff, you will pick up lesser cases, that is maybe 90%. So it has an arbitrarily 4 to 5 millimeter has been taken as a cutoff, that if the endometrial thickness is more than this, then we will do an endometrial biopsy. Apart from thickness, there are some other features which tell us that yes, sampling is required in this patient. If the endometrium shows diffuse or focal increased in echogenicity here and there, that means it is a heterogeneous endometrium. It is abnormal. Please note, I am talking of postmenopausal women. Postmenopausal woman, endometrial thickness more than 4 to 5 millimeter is abnormal. Heterogeneous endometrium is abnormal. Endometrium not visualized properly is abnormal. If you see fluid in the endometrial cavity, that is also abnormal, because that means there is some cervical stenosis or there is a possibility of a cervical pathology. And if the transvaginal ultrasound says everything is normal, but the postmenopausal woman who is having persistent bleeding again and again, that is abnormal. It requires endometrial biopsy. If a woman comes, only 1 drop of blood was there, EB was done, less than 3 millimeter is there, you can still wait. But if she's having persistent postmenopausal bleeding, irrespective of the transvaginal ultrasound findings, she requires an endometrial biopsy. But it is important in postmenopausal women because endometrial cancer can reasonably be excluded in a postmenopausal woman who has one episode of a small bleed and the endometrium is thin and it is homogeneous. We can reasonably exclude it. Please mark that I'm saying again and again, if she's having persistent bleeding, this rule does not hold. It holds if it is just a little bit of bleeding which has stopped and now the endometrium is thin, it is homogeneous, we can wait for, if another episode occurs, we will do endometrial biopsy, then otherwise we can wait. So a TVS in a postmenopausal woman is a very good indicator for us to know whether we should do biopsy or not. On the other hand, let's see what happens in a premenopausal woman. The utility of this endometrial thickness in premenopausal women has not been established because we don't have any standard threshold of abnormal ET in premenopausal women. Because premenopausal women, endometrial thickness will vary according to the phase of the menstrual cycle. It can be up to 14 millimeters in premenstrual phase. So there is no standard cutoff here. So in premenopausal women, the role of ultrasound is mainly to exclude structural causes, a polyp, a fibroid, or adenomyoma, which are common causes in premenopausal women. So in premenopausal women, it is used so that further evaluation will be based on the clinical situation. If she is having persistent bleeding, not responding to medical management, then we treat her accordingly. We take a biopsy, or if there is a suspicion of a structural disease, then we treat it accordingly. So please, this is important. The endometrial thickness in postmenopausal and premenopausal has different significance. Now, till now we have talked of doing a office endometrial biopsy, which is the recommended first line treatment for abnormal uterine bleeding in a perimenopausal and a postmenopausal age group. Which are the patients who will require a diagnostic D&C? The indications are that we did an endometrial biopsy, but it is not diagnostic, and we have a high suspicion and she has a high risk of endometrial cancer. In that case, we will do a D&C. Suppose our EB has said that it is benign, but she is continuing to have a persistent AUD, then we should take her up for D&C. Or we could not take adequate tissue from the endometrial biopsy, or we could not do an endometrial biopsy. There was a cervical stenosis, we couldn't do a biopsy, or for some reason she has an indication that anyway she is going for an operative procedure, for a laparoscopy or so. In that case, we can say that anyway she requires anesthesia and laparoscopy, we might as well do a diagnostic D&C instead of doing an endometrial biopsy. Also, if the woman comes with excessive ongoing blood loss, then diagnostic D&C is a better option because it can act as a therapeutic tool also. So these are the indications of doing diagnostic D&C as the first, after doing an EB, or these are the indications for D&C. Now, what about hysteroscopy? Yes, it is a very good modality because we can directly see the entire endometrial cavity, but we know it requires more skill, more costly, more invasive, and most of us are doing it under anesthesia. So it requires the OT time also. So being even when it is very good, it is more expensive. So, but it is said that if you are planning to do a diagnostic D&C, it is better to combine it with hysteroscopy so that we get a full advantage of the visualization of the endometrial cavity. Now, another modality we have is a saline infusion sonography. What is saline infusion sonography? We put in a small number 8 Foley's catheter intrauterine, and we inflate the balloon with a very small amount of fluid, and then we pull the catheter and we block the internal os, and we push a little amount of fluid in the endometrial cavity, and at the same time we do a transvaginal ultrasound. It helps because the endometrial cavity gets distended with fluid, and we can detect small lesions like suppose a small polyp or some mucous fibroid, which we could have missed on TVS or blind endometrial biopsy. It helps us in detecting those. So, and where is it most helpful? If on TVS we see that it is a symmetrically thickened endometrium, then SIS can help us. I will show you in a picture in the next slide how it helps us. And if the SIS tells us that it is a focal lesion, then we may not send the patient for endometrial biopsy because we have seen endometrial biopsy is better for global lesions. For focal lesions, then we may consider doing a hysteroscopy and D&C. So this is a picture which just shows you how saline infusion sonography can help you. The one on the left side shows you that there is here the endometrium seems to be thick. That is what we can make out, looks like a thick endometrium. And when we put in fluid inside the endometrial canal, we realize that the thickness was because of a submucous polyp. It is not a thick endometrium per se. So in this patient, now we've done a SIS, we know it is a focal lesion, then we might as well do a D&C and hysteroscopy rather than send this patient for an endometrial biopsy. So this is how the SIS can help us in deciding which modality of endometrial sampling to choose. It is helpful, yes, but it should not be used as a primary evaluation modality because you will not obtain any tissue for diagnosis. It can be uncomfortable for the patient, and sometimes there could be some debris, blood clot, or thickened fold, which can give a false positive result. So where is it indicated? When there is a symmetrically thick endometrium, and if suppose we have done an endometrial biopsy, the diagnosis is not clear, I want to take her up for D&C hysteroscopy, but she has some contraindication to go for under general anesthesia or for D&C. Then I can do a SIS. It will give me a rough idea as to what is the cause of this bleeding. And if SIS shows that there is a focal lesion, then I will try to do a hysteroscopy in such a patient. So till now, what we have done is how to evaluate, how to do an endometrial sampling. Now we have done an endometrial biopsy. Structural causes we have ruled out by ultrasound, and we have taken a tissue sample. Now what we will try to understand now is how do we manage and how do we act according to the endometrial biopsy report. Now, this is something which the postgraduates find very difficult. Till EB, they are fine. EB done. Now, what to do when the EB report comes? What can be the possibilities of an EB report? EB report can be inadequate. EB report can say it is secretory. It can say that there is a possibility of anovulation in the form of, it can give a proliferative report, it can give a report of hyperplasia, no atypia, it can give a report of hyperplasia with atypia, or it can say there is malignancy, right? If the EB report says it is malignancy, endometrial carcinoma, then you manage it accordingly. And that's a different chapter altogether, how to manage endometrial carcinoma. Today, what we will discuss is the first three. If it comes inadequate, what do we do? If it comes secretory, what do we do? If it is suggestive of anovulation, what do we do? Now, if the EB report is inadequate, but the patient had an episode of bleeding, postmenopausal lady, she had an episode of bleeding and it stopped. It is not persistent. We do a transvaginal and we see that the endometrial stripe is very thin. Then we may not do any further test. If she has a bleeding again, then we will think of doing another test. Inadequate EB in a patient who has had one episode, stopped bleeding and a thin endometrium, we can wait. But if she is continuing to bleed or if the endometrial stripe is thick, then we should do additional sampling such as hysteroscopy and DNC. So this is what you will do if the report comes inadequate. If the report comes secretory, it means there is no malignancy, there is no pre-malignant condition also, and she is ovulatory. So in this case, our aim is that we have to somehow make her symptomatically comfortable. So we have medical treatment, we have surgical treatment. I have given a list here, but if it is secretory, then the first line would be a non-specific agent which can decrease the blood loss. So amongst all these, we will just discuss them one by one in short, which are the things we can use if the EB report is secretory. Now, NSAIDs, we use mefenamic acid, very common. It is very low cost, doesn't have much side effects. It also relieves dysmenorrhea in case the woman has. And the advantage is that she has to take it only when she's having bleeding. It is not a continuous treatment. So it's a very good trial as a first trial in a patient who had abnormal bleeding, but the EB is secretory. The other drug, which is antifibrinolytic, which is a very commonly used drug, is the tranexamic acid, which we are all very fond of. It is more effective than NSAID, a little more costly, but yes, it is a very good drug. And there is a concern, a very low concern though, of a potential risk that there is a slight chance of increase in thromboembolic events. So these are the first line trial drugs in such a patient who has AUB, but the EB is secretory. We can try these drugs. These do not work, then the next we move on to our hormonal treatments. And the one option is giving a combined OC pill. Here, even in this age group, you can use a OC pill, especially if the ultrasound shows that her endometrium is thin and denuded. In such a situation, when there is a denuded endometrium, COC is a better, more effective drug than progesterone. And if the patients who have no contraindications to the use of estrogen, they respond better to COCs rather than progesterone because estrogen provides a better hemostasis. The other drug we can give is progestins, and progestins will be our choice if the endometrium is thick. Same patient has a thick endometrium, I would prefer to put her on progesterones. And we know we have a large armamentarium, a lot of choice for progesterones. We can put in an LNG IUS, that is the Mirena, which is very cost effective. The only problem is it takes about 6 months for its full effect, and the patient has irregular bleeding in the first 3 to 4 months, which is okay if we explain to the patient and reassure the patients usually tolerate it well. It is not a very good treatment for an acute AUB, but it is a very good drug, a very good device for a prolonged treatment. If the patient does not like an intrauterine device, which is most effective out of all the progesterone, she can take oral. In the orals, we have a lot of options, metroxyprogesterone, norethindrone, oral progesterone, micronized in cream. And for the control of the bleeding, we need to give them for at least 12 days every calendar month. Very easy for the patient to remember is day 1 to day 10 of every month, or you can give it from the day 12 of every cycle for the next 10 to 12 days. The other option, anybody who doesn't want an intrauterine device, doesn't want to take orals, can even take injectables, which can be given every 3 months. Depomedroxyprogesterone acetate can be given, and the doses I have mentioned here. These treatments I've just mentioned because they are options available but not used frequently. Danazol is very effective for controlling treatment, but the side effects are unacceptable and you cannot use it for a very long time. And once you stop Danazol, things tend to come back again and it is costly. So just remember, it is an option, not very frequently used. GnRH agonist, also an option, yes, but it is high cost. We cannot use it for more than 3 to 6 months because it causes hypoestrogenism. And once it stops, the menstrual blood loss tends to go back to its pre-treatment level. So not a very good option. Yes, the only place where it is useful is that if you're planning an endometrial ablation procedure, then we can use it to thin the endometrial lining. For preoperative thinning, it is a good option. Medical treatments are the first line of treatment in these patients. The indication of surgical treatment comes only when the medical treatment fails. Fails means you have tried the medicines, at least each medicine trialed for at least 3 cycles. You have also tried a second alternative and they have failed. Then we call it a failed medical treatment. Or a patient cannot tolerate the medical treatment, or the medical treatment is contraindicated for whatever reason, estrogen contraindicated, progesterone contraindicated. And if there is an intracavitary lesion, that of course needs a surgical treatment. So medical treatment will not work there. Or some women who will say that I cannot keep on taking long-term drugs, do something for that. So these are the patients where we think of a surgical treatment. The options we have are DNC is a surgical treatment which gives a temporary relief and it is therapeutic. And it is better if you do it with hysteroscopy, because if there is a small lesion, you can tackle that at the same time. So that is one option you can use. Endometrial ablation with a thermal balloon or a microwave, we have used it here and it is a relatively good option. It is a conservative surgical alternative to hysterectomy, but you have to rule out malignancy before you do this treatment. So we are talking of this only after we have done the endometrial biopsy and the malignancy is ruled out. And not much complications, very short recovery period, OPD procedure. It is much less morbid than hysterectomy, but the problem is that the problem tends to recur and almost 20% of the patients will further require hysterectomy. Uterine artery embolization is also mentioned as a procedure available to treat abnormal uterine bleeding, but usually done if the other treatments are contraindicated or not available. And finally, of course, hysterectomy is there. Hysterectomy is curative. We know that you don't need to do repeated procedures. You don't need very prolonged follow-up. Patient satisfaction is very high. So yes, it's a very good option we have, but we must remember that 50% of the women who take medical therapy might choose hysterectomy after trial of medical therapy, but there are 50% who have been saved from the major morbidity of hysterectomy by giving medical treatment. Therefore, medical treatment remains the first option and hysterectomy is an option which is available and a good option if required. Now, suppose our EB, we have already discussed, EB says inadequate, what do we do? EB says secretory, what do we do? EB says suggestive of anovulation. What can be the report, possible report? Either it can be proliferative or it can be hyperplasia without atypia or with atypia. So if it is anovulatory, any of these reports means patient is anovulatory. We should just quickly try to see, is there any possible cause for anovulation? Although we know in premenopausal age group, anovulation is common. But there are some causes we should just look for, like check that her thyroid function is all right, her prolactin levels are all right. These are causes of anovulation. She has no stress, weight loss, exercise, excessive, or we should look for any estrogen producing ovarian tumor which is causing anovulation, or she's on some drugs, or any other systemic disease which is leading to anovulation. So endometrial biopsy is telling us that she's anovulatory. We could just have a look once more to see that we are not missing any other cause of anovulation, and then we will treat according to what the report is. Now, if the report is endometrial hyperplasia, there is no atypia. Patient is perimenopausal. Now, what is our aim here? So far, when we were talking of endometrial biopsy report secretory, our aim was to control the AUB. That is all our aim was. Here we have two aims. One is control the AUB, and one, we want to prevent the hyperplasia from going into malignancy. So for the control of AUB, I have already told you the options when we discussed EB secretary, what you have to do, the same options are available here. Progesterone will be definitely our first line here. We will use not the NSAIDs and antifibrinolytics as the first line. Here, progesterone will be the first line because there is hyperplasia and we want to prevent further progression. So we need to give progesterone at least 12 to 14 days for 3 to 6 months. This you can do cyclically 12 to 14 days, or even if you can give continuous progesterone also for 3 to 6 months. Any of the oral preparations that we just talked of, you can also insert LNG if the patient is willing. We can also give injectable. And then after 3 to 6 months, after these progesterones, we will recheck. If the regression has not occurred, hyperplasia is still persisting, we can still increase the dose of progesterone. We can even combine both systemic and LNG. We can give her oral along with LNG and wait for a further 3 to 6 months because there is no atypia in the hyperplasia. So there is no hurry to withdraw our treatment. So we will do it for 3 to 6 months, then we will again check. If regression has not occurred, we have options to go ahead with further increased doses of progesterone. And for prevention, we can give any of these. I have already mentioned these drugs earlier. The same doses can be continued for 3 to 6 months. Now, if you get the report of endometrial hyperplasia without atypia in a postmenopausal, we have just now talked about perimenopausal. Now, in a postmenopausal woman, the problem is that I do not expect any estrogen should be there. Endometrial hyperplasia means that there is some estrogen. So in a postmenopausal woman, I am worried, where is this estrogen coming from? So I want to find out the etiology of estrogen. Most common is if the patient is obese, then adipocytes can produce the estrogen. Or if she's on hormonal replacement therapy, then that could be the cause of estrogen. But if there is no HRT, she's not on HRT, she's not obese, then I have to find out where is this estrogen coming from. One of the ways is you get a serum estradiol done, and if it is high, that means the estrogen is coming from somewhere, and I have to rule out a tumor either in the adrenal or in the ovary by different imaging modalities. And in the postmenopausal woman, also, once we have ruled out that there is no tumor either in ovary or in the adrenal, but she's still having endometrial hyperplasia, you can still give them progesterones. We can give it for 3 months, or here in the postmenopausal lady, you can give an option of hysterectomy to the patient. Here we will not say medical is definitely first line and then hysterectomy. Here you can give the option of either medical or surgical, whichever the patient wants, because it is a postmenopausal lady. And if I'm giving a medical treatment here, I would prefer to give a continuous progesterone, not cyclical, because in any case she's postmenopausal, and then we do a follow-up EB after 3 months. If it has regressed, we can stop our treatment, and if the patient has continued to bleed or it has not regressed, then we can choose hysterectomy. And if the patient is not for hysterectomy for any reason, she cannot get it done, or it is relatively contraindicated, she has some comorbidities, we can still continue this treatment for another 6 to 12 months, but we will have to keep on repeating our endometrial biopsies to see that whether it is regressing or not. This I want to emphasize, that the fact that it is a hyperplasia in a postmenopausal lady does not mean straight away hysterectomy. You have option of giving progesterone, provided you have ruled out malignancy in the ovary, in the adrenal, and she stops bleeding. If she continues to bleed, then yes, we will go ahead with hysterectomy. Now, if our endometrial biopsy report says endometrial hyperplasia with atypia, now we did a EB here. We have done an endometrial biopsy. Here, it is important to remember, when the report is atypia, there can always be a coexisting adenocarcinoma. Therefore, I will do a DNC now to rule out a coexistent adenocarcinoma, so that if it is adenocarcinoma, the surgery will be tailored accordingly. If there is none, then a simple hysterectomy will be good enough. So in these patients with atypia, hysterectomy is the treatment of choice. Why? Because there can be a coexistent adenocarcinoma. Number 2, this atypia can lead to progress into endometrial carcinoma. And number 3, these patients usually do not respond to hormonal treatment. So you have 3 good reasons that straight away hysterectomy should be done. However, if in any patient due to comorbidities or any other problem, hysterectomy is not possible, then we give them oral Megestrol acetate. Why Megestrol? Because it is more effective than more effective than the medroxyprogesterone acetate. High doses we give, and EB has to be performed after 3 months. If it regresses, we can continue the same and do EB again after 6 to 12 months. But if it persists, she should have hysterectomy. This option I gave you because there could be patients who are obese, who are diabetic, hypertensive, not fit for surgery for some time. We can use a high dose Megestrol and a high dose medroxyprogesterone acetate. The doses are higher than what we give for other conditions. Now, coming to, so far we talked of a patient who comes with that history that I am having abnormal bleeding. If the patient comes to your OPD and she's saying that she's having bleeding and profusely bleeding, first thing is to find out, is she hemodynamically stable or unstable? If it is acute profuse hemorrhage, our options are DNC, high dose progesterone, high dose estrogen, tranexamic acid, ablation, and hysterectomy. Now, if the woman is unstable, hemodynamically unstable, I'm very sure I don't have to go through all this. All the postgraduates know it by heart. Hemodynamically unstable woman, immediately wide bore cannulae, IV line, blood transfusion, a DNC to be done immediately so that it can be therapeutic as well as diagnostic. The one option we have is, suppose DNC is not stopping the bleeding, we can do a tamponade with a Foley's catheter with a 30 ml balloon and insert it so that bleeding stops, and you can make the patient hemodynamically stable after giving blood and blood products. And if you cannot manage, hysterectomy is a last resort. Of course, it is rare, but remember, never try to attempt endometrial ablation if the woman is hemodynamically unstable. Now, if the woman is stable, as I said, the options I have given you, DNC is a very good option, diagnostic as well as therapeutic, and it effectively stops severe bleeding. The problem is that it will not cure the underlying cause of menorrhagia. Focal lesions can be missed. But then if the acute phase is controlled, we will have our report of the DNC, the histopath report, and then we can treat her accordingly. High dose progesterone, here patient is having acute profuse bleed. So we will give higher dose. MPA, the medroxyprogesterone, 10 to 20 milligram 2 times per day, or Megestrol or Norethindrone, or even you can do 1 pill every 4 hours till the bleeding stops. And then you have to taper this. You don't immediately stop the high dose progesterone because then she will have withdrawal bleed again. You can give 1 pill 4 times a day, then for 4 days, then 3 times a day for 3 days, then 2 times a day for 2 weeks, so that her hemoglobin settles. And then we can, by that time, we will have our histopath report as well, and then we can plan. Now, this high dose progestin is a good option if the patient who is bleeding profusely has a thick endometrium. If she has a thin endometrium, then estrogen is a better option to control this acute profuse hemorrhage. But remember, high dose estrogen is a very emetic drug, so anti-emetic has to be added. You have again a lot of options. Premarin, higher dose, 2.5 QID. Again, we will give it for about 20 to 25 days so that we taper it off. High dose oral contraceptives, here we use the 35 microgram oral contraceptive because we have to give a higher dose. Again, then after that, we give a cascading. We cascade it down 5 pills on day 1. That means when it is hemostatic, then reduce it 4 pills, 3 pills, 2 pills, and we will continue for about 3 weeks or so that she doesn't bleed again. And by that time, we are able to get a report. This will be a good option if the endometrium is denuded, but still she's having a profuse bleed. And also tranexamic acid, higher dose, good option for acute AUB. Intrauterine tamponade, as I told you, good option. And ablation, if she's hemodynamically stable, is also a good option for acute menorrhagia. So far we have seen that this is how we will manage the different reports of endometrial biopsy in a patient who comes in a perimenopausal age group or postmenopausal age group with abnormal bleeding. I have just in the end listed a few special situations where we need to know, because here our rules will be slightly different. So these are, the patient continues to have bleeding postmenopausal, she's on tamoxifen or on HRT, or she's an asymptomatic lady. So this, just to know that those rules of first line drug, second line may not work here. Now, if the patient, she came to you with a postmenopausal bleeding, you did her endometrial biopsy said no malignancy, ruled out. But she's continuing to bleed. A persistent bleeding in a postmenopausal woman is very worrisome, because even if the initial biopsy was negative, up to 20% eventually can have atypical hyperplasia or malignancy. And we all know that, yes, we use the 4 millimeter cutoff, but endometrial thickness can be less than 4 millimeter in the serous carcinoma or in the type 2 endometrial carcinoma, which occurs in the atrophic endometrium. So if a patient is persisting to bleed, then we will have to do further diagnostic evaluation, even when our endometrial biopsy has ruled out malignancy. So next, what we will do is, now we can either repeat an endometrial biopsy, but I would prefer to do a DNC and hysteroscopy, and also to evaluate that is she bleeding from some other side, then maybe a non-endometrial source of bleeding. So persistent bleeding is something where you have to act. You can't let the patient go even when malignancy is excluded. And then according to our DNC report, sometimes repeat DNC also will not be very significant, but she persists, continues to bleed, then hysterectomy is a good choice in these patients who continue to bleed even in the post menopausal period despite a normal report. If a woman is on tamoxifen, now what is the problem? Because tamoxifen is known to cause a thickened endometrial stripe. So we don't have any cutoff of a pathological or abnormal ET in these patients. There is no baseline, so there is no role of doing a baseline endometrial assessment. If a woman is on tamoxifen, there is no indication to do a TVS. Only if she comes with bleeding, yes, then we should sample the endometrium if any abnormal bleeding occurs when the patient is on tamoxifen, because she has a slight increase in the risk of endometrial cancer. And we cannot use the endometrial thickness cutoff in these patients. If here we can, yes, because the endometrial stripe is very thick in tamoxifen patients, difficult to know on TVS, we can use the SIS. If it is a focal disease, we can take her up for hysteroscopy. If it is a diffuse disease, we can do a blind biopsy. If the patient is on HRT, again, there is no cutoff. That ET cutoff is not valid for HRT. When the patient is on HRT, we know they can have abnormal bleeding, but usually the bleeding which is on HRT decreases over time. So what are so if it is decreasing, we just need to reassure them. What are the indications of endometrial biopsy? If the bleeding does not decrease, or the bleeding starts becoming heavier, or she was taking HRT, the bleeding had stopped, and after a long period of no bleeding, now she has started bleeding. So these are the indications where you have to do endometrial biopsy. Here, TVS is not a useful screening tool because thickness threshold are not established for women on HRT. Persistent bleeding definitely requires endometrial biopsy. Now, the patient is asymptomatic. There is no postmenopausal bleeding. She just went for an ultrasound and brings a report to you with an endometrial thickness, which is more than whatever value of endometrial thickness. What do? She's asymptomatic. Now, it has been shown that the significance of ET is not very well established for asymptomatic women, but it has been seen that if the endometrial thickness is more than 11 millimeters, the risk of cancer is high. It is almost 7%, which is equal to the risk when a postmenopausal woman has bleeding and ET more than 4 millimeters. So, if it is less than 10 millimeter and no bleeding, the risk is small. So in asymptomatic postmenopausal women, sorry, there is an error there, endometrial evaluation is based on some factors, which is if the cervical cytology says there is glandular abnormality, there are endometrial cells, or we know that she has a history of estrogen excess, or there are risk factors for endometrial cancer, or the endometrial thickness is more than 10. So in an asymptomatic lady, if the endometrial thickness is less than 5, she's asymptomatic, nothing is to be done. Endometrial thickness is 5 to 10, and if there is some factor in her history which says she's a high risk for carcinoma endometrium, we can give her an option of EB, or we can even follow her up after 6 months to see the change. But an asymptomatic woman, if her ET is more than 10, even if she has not bled, should be sampled. So to summarize, an abnormal uterine bleeding in a peri or a postmenopausal woman warrants a sampling. EB is preferable to TVS or DNC as an initial test. In perimenopausal period, anovulatory bleeding is a common cause, but in postmenopausal women, our primary goal of evaluation is to rule out malignancy, and persistent bleeding is worrisome even with a benign or negative initial evaluation. Thank you.
Such an excellent talk, ma'am.
Thank you, Smriti.
It was a privilege to listen to you. Takes me back to my PG days when I had the privilege of listening to you more often.
Yeah, I'm missing you too. Yeah.
Thank you so
I
much, ma'am. Now we will
postgraduates
have the
have
case
understood.
presentation. So I request Renu to introduce our experts and our residents who are going to present the case.
Now we are here with the case on perimenopausal bleeding to be presented by our postgraduate Dr. Nupur and Dr. Tamanna. And the panel of experts for the discussion are Professor Vanita Jain ma'am, Professor Department of Obs Gynae, PGI Chandigarh, Professor Sikha Singh ma'am, Professor Department of Obs Gynae, HCL Medical College Agra, Professor Rekha Sachan ma'am, Professor Department of Obs Gynae, TGM.
Smriti, for this case, I think the Dr. Rekha and Dr. Tia can take up, the two other experts can take up the questions initially. Is that so?
Ma'am, while they are presenting the case, if there's anything they are missing or you would want to ask for,
Okay. No, no, I will.
it would be like
Yeah,
a case presentation, ma'am, how they perform in exams,
yeah, yeah. Okay,
so they know where they're faltering.
sure.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I am Dr. Tamanna. We are going to, the presenters are Dr. Tamanna and Dr. Nupur. We will be presenting a case on bleeding in perimenopausal females. The patient's name is Sonu Pandey, wife of Triparam. Her age is 49 years and she's a resident of Pitanpur, Gonda. She is a case of para 650 life 6, 49 years old female with regular cycles with heavy menstrual bleeding for last 4 years. Her menstrual history, she attained menarche at 14 years of age. Her past menstrual history includes her cycle of 28 to 30 days and a duration of 3 to 4 days. And she had average flow for which she had to use 2 to 3 pads per day, and there was no dysmenorrhea. For the last 4 years, she is having a cycle of 28 to 30 days, which is regular, and a duration of 7 to 10 days with a heavy flow, and she had to use 6 to 7 pads per day, and is associated with passage of clots. There is no history of dysmenorrhea. Her LMP is 23rd July, and she's complaining of bleeding since 23rd July. Her obstetric history, she is para 6 plus 0, life 6. All deliveries were done at home and was conducted by DAI. First delivery was 25 years back, and she delivered a female child which had a normal vaginal delivery and had uneventful cesarean. Her second delivery was 18 years back, which was a female child with a normal vaginal delivery and an uneventful cesarean. Her third delivery was 17 years back. She delivered a male child. It was also an uneventful cesarean. Fourth delivery was 15 years back. She delivered a male child, normal vaginal delivery, which was uneventful in cesarean. Her fifth delivery was 12 years back. She had a male child, which was normal vaginal delivery and with uneventful cesarean. Sixth delivery was 10 years back, and she delivered a female child normally and had uneventful cesarean. She had history of laparoscopic tubal ligation, which was done along 6 weeks after the sixth delivery, which was 10 years back. History of present illness. For the last 4 years, patient is complaining of heavy menstrual bleeding, for which she had to use 6 to 7 pads per day and is associated with passage of clots. Patient is complaining of weakness, easy fatigability, and lethargy. There is no history of intermenstrual bleeding or postcoital bleeding. There is no history of pain in abdomen, discharge per vaginum, dysmenorrhea, dyspareunia, and dysuria. For these complaints, patient visited a local practitioner 3 to 4 times and was advised some medications. During her menses, she got relief for a brief period of time, but the patient was non-compliant. There is no history of any hormonal pills intake in her pregnancy and in her interpregnancy period. There is no history suggestive of any bladder bowel complaints. There is no history of weight gain or unwanted hair or excessive hair growth. There is no history of cold intolerance or sleepiness. There is no history of excessive exercise, mental stress, and eating disorders. There is no history of milky breast discharge and blurring of vision. Past history: there is no history of heart disease, psychiatric illness, liver or kidney disease. There is no history of fever, evening rise of temperature, or chronic cough, weight loss, or loss of appetite. There is no history of concurrent illness like diabetes, hypertension. There is no history of DNC in last 1 year for these companies. There is no history of hormonal therapy in the past. Personal history: patient is vegetarian by diet. She is a non-smoker or non-alcoholic. There is no history of any other drug abuse. No history of diabetes, hypertension, tuberculosis, asthma, and thyroid. Family history: there is no history of similar complaints in any family members. There is no history of breast, uterine, ovarian cancer in first degree female relatives. There is no history of any GI malignancies. There is no history of hypertension, diabetes mellitus in the family members. Social history: patient is illiterate and is non-vegetarian. Her husband has studied until 12th standard and is a shopkeeper. So she belongs to a lower middle class socio-economic status.
Ma'am, on general examination, patient is obese. Her height is 150 centimeter and weight 72 kg. Her BMI is 32 kg per meter square. Her pulse rate is 86 minute and regular, good volume, no radial, no radiofemoral reading. BP was 130 by 80 mmHg in right arm in sitting position. Temperature 98.2 degree Fahrenheit. Respiratory rate 18 per minute. Pallor was present. There is no icterus, no cyanosis, no clubbing, no lymphadenopathy, no bruises, no ecchymosis, no petechiae, no thyromegaly. Bilateral breast was soft, no galactoria. No signs of hirsutism, for example, acne, excessive facial hairs. On systemic examination, patient was conscious oriented to time, place, and person. On respiratory examination, piloted equal air entry with no added sound word. CVS examination, S1, S2 were normal, apex teeth in the left with intercostal space in mid-clavicular line. For abdominal examination, abdomen was pendulous, soft, non-tender, no palpable organomegaly was felt, no palpable lump, and bowel sounds were present. On local examination, pubic hair were normal, perineal skin normal, labia majora and minora normal, clitoris and urethra meatus were normal. On pelvic examination, on per speculum, cervix and vagina was healthy. On per vaginal examination, cervix was backward, uterus was anteverted, bulky, 6-week size, mobile, non-tender. Bilateral cornice is clear and non-tender. On per rectal examination, rectal mucosa was free, no nodularity present, also platelets, and parametrium was also. Upon this history and examination, we have made a provisional diagnosis of this patient as para 6 plus 0, live 6, 49-year-old perimenopausal woman with AUB with severe anemia with history of flat ligation. Ma'am, on evaluating this patient, we had taken some points. Her age is 49 years. She has presented with chief complaints of heavy menstrual bleeding along with regular cycles. Anemia was a risk factor and obesity with BMI of 32 kg per meter square. And on per vaginal examination, uterus was working. According to these points, we have made a differential diagnosis with endometrial hyperplasia, followed by endometrial polyp, adenomyosis, fibroid, or endometrial carcinoma.
Any investigation was available with the patient?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, we had taken out the investigation and her hemoglobin was obtained 3.2 kg, 3.2 gram per deciliter, TLC 10,000, AVOH P positive, TSH 1.54, prolactin 20, PT 12.4, INR 0.92, and on previous examination, ma'am, uterus bulky, endometrial thickness 16 mm, and bilateral ovaries were normal in size.
Can we go back to your differential diagnosis, please? Yeah,
This one.
differential diagnosis. The 4 differential diagnoses that you have given. Next one. Okay. Can you just explain how you reached these conclusions and support your diagnosis? Why do you say so?
Ma'am, firstly, on the per abdominal examination, ma'am, on the basis of history and examination, we have taken out all the points for ruling out these differential diagnoses. Ma'am, on per abdominal examination, uh, PA was soft, but on per vaginal examination, uterus was bulky. So we had taken in mind that it might be because of these factors, but it was non-tender. So we had taken out the point adenomyosis. And ma'am, also fibroid uterus. Ma'am, we have performed a TVS examination, and in that endometrial thickness was 16 mm. So it was more likely towards endometrial hyperplasia, but we cannot be sure about whether it's hyperplasia or endometrial carcinoma.
No, beta,
But
you
there
are
was no.
absolutely right in saying, but you do not. This differential diagnosis has come before you have done your investigations, right? This is from the history and examination. You are right. All you have to justify is that why are you thinking of this in this order? What are the features in her history which go in favor of endometrial hyperplasia? Just can you tell me? Just
Ma'am,
support your diagnosis. You are right. If you say you are right in saying endometrial hyperplasia, how do you justify?
ma'am,
According to her history, she has proper regular cycles, and she only had heavy menstrual bleeding, which
Okay.
is mostly a uterine, which directs us towards a uterine cause. She's a perimenopausal female, for which endometrial hyperplasia is the most common cause of a heavy menstrual.
Okay. Okay. Anything
And
else?
you-
A risk factor in your history examination?
Ma'am, her BMI is 32, and which falls in obese category.
Yes.
So, which is a risk factor for endometrial hyperplasia.
ma'am, it is a risk factor for hyperestrogenic state. And also for endometrial polyp, there is a chief complaint of intermenstrual bleeding also. And for adenomyosis, usually it presents with uterine tenderness, but these were all absent. And
So doesn't she have a feature suggestive of polyp? She doesn't have any feature suggestive of adenomyosis, right? Except for the size of the uterus, which is slightly more. Okay, and of course, you will at this age you want to rule out an endometrial carcinoma. She's severely anemic, right? Anything else you want to check if it is severely anemic?
ma'am, we wanted to check whether she didn't have any coagulopathy, so, and whether she is actually a case of chronic AUB.
Yes.
And yes,
Okay.
ma'am,
Okay, a patient who is severely anemic. Anything you want to check? Something very a severely anemic patient, a complication that they can have, which you should always check. Severe anemia. What else do you? She looks 2-3 grams. That's what you are saying. Very pale.
yes, ma'am, 3 grams.
So on examination, something you specifically look for. Very
Her
simple. question.
cardiovascular,
Huh? Yes, yes. Go ahead. You're right.
on general examination and systemic examination, her pulse, her respiratory rate should be examined properly. And on cardiovascular examination, S1, S2 sound should be heard. It should be properly examined. And for signs of
Severe anemia.
signs
में
of
क्या हो
congestive heart failure,
Yes, yes, yes.
signs of congestive heart failure like pedal edema, pulmonary edema, splenomegaly should be ruled out properly.
Specifically, you have to look for features of cardiac failure if she is a severely anemic lady, right? Because that will probably need treatment before anything else. So when you say severe anemia, she is not in failure, right? So that is one thing which is important. Yes, your differential diagnoses are correct, fine. So now with this differential diagnosis, and you already know the hemoglobin, you've already said hemoglobin is abnormal. Apart from that, there is nothing in the blood test? No. So what next would you like to do? In this patient, what would you like to do next?
Firstly, we would like to optimize her hemoglobin and correction of anemia should be given. For that, this one.
What will you do?
And for that, her complete iron profile, her GBP should be done to rule out other causes of anemia. And if they are within normal limits, her blood transfusion should be done.
Okay.
PRBC transfusion should be done, ma'am.
Ma'am,
Okay.
also we would like to start her on progestins so that when she is actively bleeding and we are giving blood products so she doesn't lose. And we like to.
I understand you said that her last period was on 29th or something of July.
27.
27th, and she's not bleeding at the moment. She's not bleeding at the moment,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So what will be your next line? I agree she's anemic, and so you may have to give her blood transfusion to build her up. That is fine. What next? What else do you want to give? You want to straight away start her on progesterone? She's not bleeding at the moment. You don't need any hemostatic progesterones. Am I right? Do you understand that? If she had,
Ma'am,
said she has come and she's bleeding and she's profusely bleeding, I want to start straight away progesterone, I would probably say yes. But at this point of time, she's not bleeding. What would you like to do in this patient?
Ma'am, we would like to perform endometrial sampling in this patient to see the cause for this.
Okay. Why do you want to do endometrial biopsy? What is the indication?
Ma'am, because
You're
she
right.
is in a,
Yes.
ma'am, she is in a perimenopausal
Yes.
woman.
Yes. She's 49.
And,
Yes.
but,
Yes.
ma'am, and she has presented with severe anemia with heavy menstrual bleeding.
Yes.
So we would like to rule out the most common cause. It might be endometrial carcinoma, which is more common, and most common is endometrial hyperplasia.
Okay.
So
So
we
you
would
want
like
to
to-
do endometrial biopsy. Anything else you want to do apart from the blood investigations?
Ma'am, we would like to perform a transvaginal sonography and look out for the other causes. If there is any fibroid or polyp, or ma'am, we would like to rule out adenomyosis also. If it is possible, we would like to perform saline infusion sonography, because
Okay, wait. Just tell me 1, 2, 3. What are the things when you're doing ultrasound? What all will you look for in the ultrasound? You are the person doing the ultrasound, right? In this patient. So what are you going to? You said you will rule out a fibroid. You will rule out a polyp. What else do you want to look for? You will look for a fibroid. You will look for a polyp. You will look for an adenomyoma. That's what you said. Adenomyosis. What else?
ma'am, endometrial thickness,
You will look at.
we will look for
Very good. Endometrial thickness. What else?
ma'am, bilateral adnexa.
Very good. Why do you want to look at the adnexa specifically in this patient?
I mean,
Any significance?
if there is an adnexal mass, there may be which may cause an hyperestrogenic effect,
What
which may
adnexal
cause
mass? Yes, correct. What adnexal mass can cause hyperestrogenic effect? Which adnexal mass?
Which
granulosa cell tumors.
Very good. So there could be a granulosa cell tumor which is causing an increase in hyperestrogenic state and then causing this. So you will look for the structural causes, you will look at the adnexa, and you will look at the endometrial thickness. Now, how will you interpret the endometrial thickness in this patient? She is a premenopausal lady. So what is your interpretation of the endometrial thickness? How will you interpret this? What is normal? What is abnormal? How will you?
I mean, in perimenopausal female, less than 4 mm of endometrial thickness is normal, and in our case,
What did you, please repeat? Please repeat. What did you say?
I mean, in perimenopausal, 4 to 5 mm of endometrial thickness is normal, and in postmenopausal, endometrial thickness of 4 mm is considered to be a normal size.
Oh, no,
Normal.
please. No, you didn't get what I specifically told
it
you.
was very much highlighted by ma'am in her lecture also.
So this is very important. Endometrial thickness of 4-5 millimeter is a cutoff for postmenopausal. Please remember this. It is a cutoff for a postmenopausal woman. Just now tell me, what is a normal endometrial thickness in a premenopausal lady? If you know the normal, you will know the abnormal. What is a normal endometrial thickness in a patient who is cyclically menstruating?
Ma'am, up to 11 mm.
Up to 11 at any point of time?
Ma'am, ma'am, in proliferative phase, it's 6 mm, and in secretory phase, it's 12 mm.
So
And if
it
it is
varies
greater
according
than
to the phase, and in proliferative phase, it could be about 4 to 8 millimeters, and in the secretory phase or the pre-menstrual phase, it could be 8 to 14 millimeters. So that is the range of an normal endometrium in a normally cyclically menstruating woman. So a cutoff of 4 or 5 millimeter cannot be used. So please remember, the cutoff of endometrial thickness for transvaginal ultrasound is not valid if the woman is having cyclical periods in a premenopausal woman. Okay, and this patient we are discussing is a premenopausal woman. So you are right that you will rule out structural causes, polyp, fibroid, adenomyosis. You will look at the adnexa. You can see the thickness, but when I ask you how do you interpret, you can say that the normal thickness can go up to 14 millimeter. There is no definite cutoff, but yes, you can have a look at that thickness. Okay, what next? You have done a TVS. I think you gave a report also to TVS. How much was the thickness?
Yeah.
11 or
Investigation.
something. How much did you say?
16.
16 mm.
16 mm. Okay, so it is still on the higher side because usual is up to 14 millimeter.
And
But
you should mention the phase of the cycle when which the TVS was performed.
yes,
Because she is not on cyclic hormones. She was only on hemostats most probably. So the cycle phase should be mentioned. It has more significance.
the validity, yes, absolutely. Madam is saying that the validity will be according, that's how you will interpret. This 16 millimeter, you tell me post-menstrual, it has been done, that is really very thick. Pre-menstrual, it is not very thick. Okay? So yes, agreed, you will do a transvaginal. You have also, you have done a transvaginal sonography. Now what do you want to do?
Ma'am,
We'll proceed with endometrial sampling.
You want to do endometrial sampling. What method of endometrial sampling will you use? What are the different methods of endometrial sampling? Can you just tell me? How can you obtain?
And I would like to interfere. While you were evaluating the endometrial hyperplasia, you should mention is what the endometrial hyperplasia was uniform or it was localized, so that any further intervention while you are doing your ultrasonography, as you mentioned, saline infusion. So that depends upon the uniformity or localization, or if you are in doubt, then only you will go for sampling. Otherwise, before that, you need to localize it to be a polyp, which you can rule out while you are doing your TVS. You can do saline infusion sonography, and you can then confirm it to be a polyp. Then you can plan, instead of sampling, you can plan for polypectomy under vision by hysteroscopy.
ma'am, endometrial sampling can be performed by as endometrial aspiration biopsy, or it can be hysteroscopic guided. As ma'am has mentioned, ma'am, few of the procedures which are daycare procedures, which are office hysteroscopic guided aspiration and office endometrial aspiration are also upcoming techniques. And ma'am, in this patient, we would like to perform endometrial biopsy if possible.
Okay, you will perform an endometrial biopsy. And what will you tell the patient? Biopsy, the report is going to come in about maybe 2 weeks' time. So she's come to your OPD. Will you admit this patient? Just curiosity.
Yes, ma'am.
Why do you want to admit this?
Because the patient is hemodynamically unstable.
Unstable?
And
Oh, you showed your vitals were fine.
Vitally stable. But her lab reports, which includes hemoglobin, is 3.
Yes, she's severely anemic. That's right. Okay. So you want to admit her. Then you have done an endometrial biopsy. What else will you do for this patient?
Antifibrinolytics, injection Trenexa may be given.
Why do you want to? She's not bleeding at the moment, Vita. You said she's not bleeding. Then why do you want to give tranexamic acid at the moment? She has not come with bleeding, no? You only said she had a 6-7 day cycle and it is over. So there is no role of tranexamic acid. What else will you do? Admit her and do what? Endometrial biopsy, agreed. What else?
We will transfuse blood.
Yes. What kind of blood do you want to transfuse?
And whole
PRPC.
whole blood.
Okay. Any precautions you will take in this particular patient when you are doing blood transfusion apart from what you do for others specifically?
Ma'am, we will not rapidly transfuse PRBC. We will transfuse slowly under Lasix coverage. So
Why?
she doesn't get, she does, ma'am, for fluid overload, she doesn't land into congestive heart failure,
Good,
ma'am.
very good. Okay. So you will give blood transfusion, you have taken endometrial biopsy. Okay, what next? What next will you do?
Ma'am, we will counsel the patient that we have taken the biopsy, and accordingly we have to follow up the patient. So after stabilization of the patient, if the patient is not bleeding, we can discharge and follow up in the OPD
Okay.
with the SHP, with the report of biopsy.
Just hold on. So you plan that
You
you've
will
given
not
blood
prescribe
transfusion
any.
and you are going to discharge. Now, what advice are you going to give on the discharge? What will you tell her? Okay, you've given blood and she's become better with her hemoglobin. Then you are going to let her go home. So
And we
what
will
advice?
explain the danger sign to the patient that if she has any bleeding, which is if she lands up in acute phase of a UV and she's actively bleeding, she can come anytime in emergency. And ma'am, we will advise tap Trenexa and
Okay, that is if she bleeds acutely, which is expected now. End of August, she's going to bleed because her cycle length is fine, है ना? Right? Anything else you want to do? Beta, very common sense thing. You are sending her away. She's severely anemic. Given her blood, you want to give her something. Anything?
For hemoglobin correction, iron supplements to be given.
Yes, definitely. You will turn on iron supplements so that you have given her blood, but it should, okay, fine. So okay. So then she comes back for her endometrial biopsy report. Okay. Now when she comes back, the doctor, do you want to ask anything or should I go on?
If a patient comes with endometrial biopsy, if it is a security, then what you can do?
Ma'am, we can start her on oral contraceptive pills, ma'am, progesterones, and ma'am, we can give cyclical progestins to this patient.
Which one preferred treatment? अभी मैडम ने बताया आपको.
Most commonly we use medroxyprogesterone, just given 10 to 20 mg per day, thrice a day.
If she is bleeding acutely, then what you can prefer?
Tranexamic acid, antifibrinolytics are to be given, 10 to 1 gram TDS, and
SAIDs can be given, ma'am.
progesterone therapy and estrogen therapy also can be given, ma'am.
Which type of progesterone preferred?
In this patient, will you prefer estrogen therapy when she
No,
had
ma'am,
a
if
endometrial
it has
thickness?
thickness, endometrial thickness, so we will prefer progesterone therapy. And ma'am, norelcestrone is the most common drug which we use, and we can give norelcestrone to this patient, 5 mg TDS, ma'am, on the continuous therapy.
And if she has come to you with the acute episode during her periods, you will like to change the dose of progestin, or you will prescribe 5 TDS from day one, no change.
The dose has to be increased to 10 mg TDS, and maximum dose of 15 to 20 mg TDS can also be given, ma'am, if the bleeding is not controlled.
And ma'am, if the bleeding is also not controlled, we can give 4 hourly also, progesterone.
So there are a lot of drugs you can give. There is acute bleeding going on, but they are given in higher dose. As we mentioned, if it is thick endometrium, progesterones are a little better. If it is denuded endometrium, COCs are better, and you can give the non-specific ones, right? the tranexamic acid. And what is important is if she comes with acute episode of bleeding, very heavy bleeding, you should give high dose hormones, but do not stop them. You taper them over a few days so that she does not start bleeding again. Okay. Suppose now your first diagnosis was hyperplasia and the report also comes as hyperplasia. Then what will you do? The report is endometrial hyperplasia. Now what will you do?
Ma'am, we continue with the progesterone therapy only.
You have not specified, you will not ask that endometrial hyperplasia with or without. Further specification you have not asked.
Ma'am,
First question, if someone tells you it is hyperplasia, first question is it without atypia or with atypia? Why? Why is it important?
From the management, if it is with if it is without atypia, the progesterone therapy has to be continued, and if it is with atypia, the treatment of choice is hysterectomy, ma'am.
Why?
So,
Why so?
because it can land to carcinoma, it can land to malignancy.
Both can lead to malignancy, but what is the difference?
the rate of progression of endometrial carcinoma in cases of endometrial hyperplasia with atypia is almost 28%, ma'am. So
without atypia,
ma'am, it is 1%.
simple
And we can
hyperplasia
follow
What is the endometrial hyperplasia classification which was previously being followed and now from last 7 years it has been changed? Which was the previous one? Because you are telling 1% along change to malignancy along to the previous classification which was followed 7 years back, and from 2014 WHO has modified. So what was the initial one and what is the latest one which is being followed?
Ma'am, the initial one includes, it is divided into hyperplasia, simple hyperplasia with atypia, simple hyperplasia without atypia, and there's complex hyperplasia with atypia and complex hyperplasia without atypia, with atypia.
Yeah. So simple without atypia conversion rate to malignancy was 1%.
1%.
So simple without atypia, that was in the older classification. Now only two subgroups,
Endometrial type
without atypia or with atypia. In without atypia, how will you prescribe the progestin?
Ma'am, metroxyprogesterone acetate is given at 10 mg. It can be given in cyclical and in continuous phase.
No, that is why I asked. If it is a case of hyperplasia without atypia, but case of hyperplasia, it should never be given cyclically. In the secretory endometrium, as Rekha ma'am told that the histopathology came and you were saying cyclically, that was okay. But if it is a case of hyperplasia without atypia and perimenopausal age group, you will never give cyclical. It has to be continuous.
Yes.
And endometrial sampling further?
Ma'am, every 3 to 6 months, ma'am, we will repeat endometrial sampling to look out for whether it's not progressing into endometrial hyperplasia with atypia.
You said progesterone you want to give. Why did you choose only oral? You have a lot of options.
Yeah.
And you should always give the options to the patient.
Options.
Ma'am, if the patient is willing and she is not compliant, we can ask for levonorgestrel IUD, which is Mirena.
Yes, so
that is the
whenever you are
preferred
deciding,
one. That is the preferred one.
out of the two, it is more effective, the LNG UCD. So whenever you decide you want to give progesterone, you should always give an option to the patient. You have oral, you have intrauterine device, you have injectable, and the patients, they have their own choice and their own preferences, and you should prescribe accordingly, right?
Yes.
Okay,
And
so
because the clarity is also complete, so we can ask for the patient whether she wants to have a hysterectomy or whether she wants to continue with LNG IUD.
well, we are talking of hyperplasia without atypia, beta. Would you like to offer in a premenopausal woman? Would you like to offer hysterectomy to her?
There are some indications in which case you will prescribe hysterectomy. In cases of hyperplasia without atypia, there are definite indications. In which conditions you will prescribe hysterectomy?
Ma'am, if the medical therapy is not effective and the patient is continuously having heavy menstrual bleeding, then we will prescribe hysterectomy for the patient.
Not effective, one. Yes. Other?
Yes. Ma'am, if the repeated biopsies are showing endometrial hyperplasia, yeah.
Either
Then
they
we
are
can-
showing non-regression, or they are showing progression, or they are showing changes to atypia.
Yeah. Then we can ask for hysterectomy.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so in
first
a
option, you
patient,
will not give hysterectomy.
endometrial hyperplasia without atypia, your first option is always medical because hysterectomy is associated with morbidity. It's a morbid procedure. You can't take hysterectomy lightly. So first option is medical, and you will go straight away to hysterectomy if the medical option is contraindicated or there is a problem in taking it. She cannot tolerate the medical treatment. Then you have the option of surgical. Fail also means you have tried the medical treatment just for 2-3 cycles. You've tried the other options of medical, and then you call it a failed medical, right? So in patient without atypia, hysterectomy will not be the first option. The first option will be the medical, unless they cannot be given. Okay, you are going on saying I will give progesterone. I will give, which is the patient in which it will be absolutely contraindicated to give progesterone. You might get a group of patients where you can't give progesterone, like.
A patient had a history of deep venous thromboembolic phenomena in the past.
That's a relative contraindication, not an absolute contraindication. You can use the intrauterine device, that's not a problem. Any other condition where it will be absolutely contraindicated to give progesterone?
Liver and renal dysfunction.
No. Why should progesterone be contraindicated in liver and renal dysfunction?
Ma'am, if the patient is a known case of breast cancer
Yes,
and
very good.
hormonal
If it is a
therapy,
progesterone receptor positive breast cancer is an
Yeah.
absolute contraindication for progesterone. And we do get patients like that. It is there that you cannot use progesterone. Any progesterone hormone sensitive cancer, if a patient is suffering from, specifically the ones which we usually deal is a breast cancer which is PR positive, you cannot give a progesterone in that case. Okay. So that will be contraindicated, and then yes, then there are other options. You will take other options, or even you might have to take up hysterectomy. That's fine. If it is so, if medical treatment fails or is contraindicated or is not tolerated, or the patient refuses that I will not take a long-term treatment, only then will you go ahead with hysterectomy. And if she says there is atypia, if the report says atypia, then what will you do? You have done an endometrial biopsy. Report is endometrial hyperplasia with atypia. What will you do?
ma'am, hysterectomy is surgery.
Anything else? I am worried the report on endometrial biopsy is hyperplasia with atypia. I am worried about something. What are the things that can worry you if it is with atypia? I don't want to straight away go for hysterectomy. Why? Okay, what is the problem with atypia? Why are you worried with atypia? It can progress. You said no, 27 to 28% chance it can progress. What else? That is one reason for the worry. What else? What else is the problem when the report of endometrial biopsy is hyperplasia with atypia? There can be a coexistent adenocarcinoma. Okay, there is a very thin line. So it is possible that in some area it is a hyperplasia with atypia, and another area it is an adenocarcinoma. So there can be a coexistent adenocarcinoma. And if adenocarcinoma is there, I will have to tailor my treatment accordingly. So it is better to go ahead with a proper DNC, hysteroscopic DNC, take a complete sample and see that there is no coexisting carcinoma, and then go ahead with hysterectomy. Okay? You get it? Suppose you cannot do hysterectomy. Is there any possibility? Sometimes it happens. Patient has lot of comorbidities and very high risk case for hysterectomy. Then what will you do? He has atypia.
Ma'am, we can ask for endometrial ablation also, which is also
Okay.
for this endometrial thickness, ma'am.
This kind of patient, then preferable to give a high dose of, you will have to give a very high dose of progesterone, and the one which is most effective in such situations is megestrol. Okay. What is the dose of Megestrol that we give? The others, so you must be knowing MPA and Normegestrone you're giving every day. What about Megestrol? How much do you give? So when you need a very effective progesterone effect, like in a patient of hyperplasia with atypia in whom you cannot do hysterectomy, which you want to do, then you give Megestrol. Megestrol is given 80 milligram twice a day. And then what will you do? You have started her on Megestrol, then what will you do? How will you follow her up?
Progesterone and follow up for repeated sampling.
When will you do the repeat sampling?
3 to 6
months.
3 months. 3 months, pakka. If it is atypia, you will do a repeat sampling in 3 months. And suppose after 3 months, the report is still the same. Then what will you do? Same report, despite giving Megestrol 80 BD. Then what will you do? Then you will recheck that has she been optimized? Can I do a hysterectomy now? Because that's my treatment of choice. So maybe she had a diabetes which is controlled or any other problem which has been controlled. So you will recheck. If you can do a hysterectomy, fine. If it's still she is not fit for hysterectomy, then you increase the dose of Megestrol. You can make it 160 milligram twice a day, right? And again the same procedure. Then you will have to repeat after 3 months again an endometrial biopsy. That's a difficult situation to manage where you want to do a hysterectomy and you're not able to. Okay. Anything else, Doctor? And one just light remark I wanted to make, that when you are presenting this kind of a case, what is the significance of the obstetric history which you gave in such detail? It's good to take a detailed history, but when you're presenting, we always pick and choose what should be presented with the reference to the case. Now, in this case, what is the importance of that obstetric history?
Ma'am, endometrial in a nulliparous female, it is more.
No, ma'am is saying detailed. You will take that she was para 6, life 6, but the detail of the obstetric history would have been a case of a prolapse. Then a detailed history would be required, that home delivery conducted by whom, in which posture. Then a detail would have been more relevant.
See, when you're presenting, if you present intelligently, the examiner comes to know that you understand everything. And all of us know obstetric history has to be taken, but in a particular case, what is the relevance? So in this kind of a patient, you can always cut short the obstetric history, saying that she had 6 normal deliveries, all full term, all vaginal deliveries, and probably each history will not add to it will take your time, which you can utilize in discussion and otherwise, and especially if it is a short case, then it wastes time. Do you understand? I just wanted to tell you that do not spend too much time where it is not needed. On the other hand, you give very good negative history. Like you have given history of thyroid disorder, you have given history which is significant in this patient. That is good. But a detailed obstetric history was probably not warranted in this case. Okay? So when you take it, but you present what is relevant to the case.
And amount of blood loss, how would you assess according to history? Because you have clinically examined her and found to be severely anemic. So her history was found to be relevant, but how do you assess only on history basis that what she is saying, amount of monthly blood loss? How will you assess? What will you ask her?
Firstly, the duration of the bleeding has to be asked, and the number of pads she uses per day, and associated, if it is associated with passage of thought.
And amount of the soke of the pad also is to be told. Maybe she is not changing the pad for full soakage.
Yes.
And we will use pictorial blood assessment chart. According to that, we will analyze it. It is very helpful. It is for objectifying the blood loss, ma'am.
Yeah.
According to that, we have labeled it as heavy menstrual bleeding. In this chart, it has been mentioned that if the patient uses one towel and which is slightly soaked, we have given 1 point as lightly soaked. and if it is moderately soaked, then 5 points, and if it's whole soaked, then 20 points, and if it's passage of one cloth which is less than 1 inch, then 1 point, and if it is greater than one cloth and greater than 1 inch, then ma'am, accordingly, ma'am, points are added. And if the patient uses tampon, accordingly, we will classify it.
Good.
Ma'am, if the total score is greater than 100, then we label it as heavy menstrual bleeding.
I think Smriti, we are done. Any presentation? They have
All right, ma'am.
they have prepared some presentation. Is it? No.
No, ma'am. I think that is all. This is all we usually plan. We have one presentation by the faculty and one case discussion in the presence of experts.
If the students have any doubt, please you can ask after the
You can either
talk
put
or
it on
after
the
the
chat box,
discussion.
or you can unmute yourself,
Yes,
or
please.
you can raise a hand.
Yeah.
So we can ask you to put up your query.
Any doubts?
We have students from a lot of medical colleges, ma'am, and most of the times they are actually relaying the hall. All the students are sitting together and listening.
Yeah, I can see one of the halls there, right? Anyone, something which is not clear to you, so you should be able to go back with the idea that when a patient of this age group comes, how to proceed and how to manage.
I think, ma'am, they have no questions. And anyway, your talk was very lucid and very elaborate and very up to date.
Thank you, Smriti.
And thank you so much, ma'am, for clearing all our doubts as well. And I'm sure the residents also benefited a lot.
Thank you. I'm truly humbled.
Thank you so much.
Please.
It's a pleasure to have you always. Thank you, Dr. Shikha, and thank you, Dr. Rekha Sachan, ma'am, for joining us today and guiding our
I know it was a great, session.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, we can hear. Ma'am, I think you're muted now.
No, unmute.
From my side, I'm not muted. Okay, thank you very much. If my voice is not reaching, bye.
Voice is reaching, ma'am.
So thank you so much, ma'am. And as we have always said that we do alternate obs and gynae cases in the month. So September, we will have a case of obstetrics. And we will soon firm up the plan and we will let everybody know. Our aim is actually to try as many faculties and residents as possible. And we have been able to achieve that and we will try to improve further. We'll be happy if there are any suggestions. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Nupur and Shikha.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving the opportunity. Thank you.
Good presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Yashodhara. Ma'am. Pleasure to have you all through the meeting.
Sorry. Smriti, shall we leave? Hello. I think this should leave.